The Gospel according to John, the 11th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Mary was the one who anointed the Lord with perfume and wiped his feet with her hair. Her brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent a message to Jesus, "Lord, he whom you love is ill." But when Jesus heard it, he said, "This illness does not lead to death. Rather, it is for the glory of God, so that God's Son may be glorified through it." Accordingly, though Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, after hearing that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then, after this, he said to his disciples, "Let us go to Judea again." The disciples said to him, "Rabbi, the Jews are just now trying to stone you, and you're going there again?" Jesus answered, Are there not 12 hours of daylight? Those who walk around during the day do not stumble, because they see the light of this world. But those who walk at night stumble, because the light is not in them. After saying this, he told them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to awaken him." The disciples said, "Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will be all right." Jesus, however, had been speaking about his death, but they thought he was referring to merely sleep. Then Jesus told them plainly, "Lazarus is dead. For your sake, I'm glad that I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him." Thomas, who was called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, "Let us go also, that we may die with him." When Jesus arrived, they found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, some 2 miles away, and many of the Jews who had come to Martha and Mary began to console them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, while Mary stayed at the home. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said to him, "I know he will rise in the resurrection of the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" She said to him, "Yes, Lord. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one who is coming into the world." When she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary and told her privately, "The teacher is here and calling for you." And when she heard it, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. The Jews who were with her in the house consoling her saw Mary get up quickly to go out. They followed because they thought she was going to the tomb to weep there. When Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, Where have you laid him?" And they said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he open the eyes of the blind? Have kept this man from dying?" Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, already there is a stench because he has been dead 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. And Jesus looked upward and said, "Father, thank you for having heard me. I know that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, he cried out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" The dead man came out, his hands and his feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. And Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." Many of the Jews believed. Many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and had seen what Jesus did, believed in him. The gospel of our Lord. We are near the end. We face the end of this season, the end of all seasons. We are near to the end. The series of questions that we have in this season and in our lives focuses now on the end. Questions, questions, questions that have filled this season and our lives. Questions to God, about life. Questions that began with the question, did God really mean? Did God really say? And the echo from God that is a reconciling God, where are you? Questions about rebirth. Questions about how God can accomplish this. And promises about God's love in Jesus Christ. Questions about water. Questions about living water and how we get this water. And promises about refreshment each and every day. Questions about sight, new ways of seeing. Questions about sin and brokenness. Questions about healing. Questions that are answered with a promise of a new way of being that is different than the standard, but the accepted, but the judgmental. New sight that sees the promise in life. But those pale in many ways. Big questions, pillar questions for life, about life and water and birth and sight. But they pale when they face the questions about the end. We are at the end. Not that just a season, but of all seasons. Because now we face the greatest question about the greatest thing we will ever wrestle against. The one that has touched each and every one of us in some way. A valley of death. A tomb that is full. Can these bones live? What a question. Can these bones live, O son of Adam and Eve? Can these bones live? This is a question about not just anything, but that question. What happens? This is when questions stop, when these bones are there, a valley full of dryness and death. Can these bones live? And the prophet smartly says, hey, I'm just a guy. You're God. You should know. Because there is no great answer that we can give about the end. It's the end. And what happens next is that Shakespeare says, the undiscovered country. We don't know. And Shakespeare reminds us, it's a country when someone goes there, they don't come back to tell us about it. It's that place you only go once. And it's an ultimate one-way street. Can these bones live? You're God. I don't know. But there's another question that precedes this that I think is compelling and one we have faced as well. It's an implicit question. It's not a real question, but more an accusation that is a question in disguise. Lord, if you had been here, they wouldn't have died, would they? If you had been here, where were you? We started with this season with God asking, where are you? Now we echo back, where were you? Where are you? In this valley of dryness, in this tomb full of the stench of death, where were you? Where was your righteousness? Where was your love now? It's been my privilege and honor to preside at many funerals and memorial services over my tenure as a pastor. And many of those have been grieving, yet times of closure, times of a good goodbye, if you will. Times of pain, but a time when either by age or long disease, it was time. It was time. And we hear that in people's conversations. Oh, I'm glad she's not suffering anymore. Or he lived a great old life. Those times are hard, but soothing, perhaps, in some ways. But I have faced, and you have too. We have faced those times before the tomb when we are not consoled, and it is not a time when we are soothed. It was not their time. I have stood with parents of 4-year-olds and 12-year-olds and others that have been too young, too tragically taken. And there have been those questions. Where were you, God? And so often, this is the text. Probably the majority of sermon or funerals that I have done, this is the text. And every time I hear Martha's and Mary's accusation, and it echoes back and forth, where were you? We are facing the end. Do these bones live? You know, God. Can the stench of death be taken away? We face the end. What is left? What is left? Of all these questions, of all this journey, of all this time, and all this preparation for us as God's people now to enter next week enter the week of questions that we call holy. The week of questions that is the most powerful and influential and most essential week for us to remind us of the questions and the realities and the promises of life. And even that has fine fill of questions. My God, where are you? Why have you abandoned me? We face the end. So, siblings, where do we stand with Ezekiel, with Mary, and Martha, and all the rest of weeping families asking the same question? Where are you, God, in this pain, in this dryness, when my life feels like death and so dry that I don't know if this bone will live again? This set of corpses, this part of death, I don't know what happens when death comes physically to those I love or to myself. Where are you in this, God, in the end? Because, truth be told, it's fine to talk about water. It's fine to talk about all this other things, about birth, about sight. But the end is not philosophical conversation anymore. That's where it gets real. And all this churchy stuff, this faith stuff, changes when we step off that left cliff. Where are you going to be, God? Preach, God tells Ezekiel. Preach, tells the prophet in the face of death, beyond imagination. Preach! Blow the Spirit into these bones. Let the Spirit reanimate them. Let the Spirit fill them with new life. It's a proclamation for us all that the Word of God, the promise, the same breath and Spirit, the literal ruach in Hebrew, the pneuma in Greek, the wind fills the death. Just like it brings life to creation in the chaos, in the beginning of the whole process, it does this new creation. And it focuses on the good news. Remember, the good news is a promise. And the promise is a person. And the person is Jesus Christ. Here's where the answer lies. I am the resurrection and the new life. And here's the hook of the question. Here's where it all falls. Do you trust this? Yes, Lord. I believe that you are the sent one, that you are the Son of God, and in you I have life. Series of questions, that's it for all of us. Do you believe this? All the questions may not get answered. I still am haunted by some funerals that I've done. And I wept at the 4-year-old's death, and I wept at the 12-year-old's death, because it isn't calculable what happened. I have no answers. I've wept at other funerals too that's like, God, where were you? They echo back. Do you trust? Mortal, you will not know how dry bones live. You will not know on this side what everything's about. Whether you're learned like Nicodemus, whether you're ostracized like the woman at the well or the man born blind, whether you're shame-filled like our first parents, you will not know everything. But know this, at the end, do you trust in a promise that is embodied by the only one, the only one who was broken through from the undiscovered country and comes to us, came back, continues to come with new life and resurrection. We ultimately, the proclamation is we ultimately are Easter people. The promise is greater than those questions we cannot ever understand. Do you trust? Yes, Lord. By your Spirit, I believe. Thanks be to God.